this official part, I just want to say that I'm touched. I'm deeply touched, as I am as a citizen of Warsaw, of Poland, and of Europe. So I'm very touched that it was possible to organize this conference. I would like to thank all the speakers, but also I would like to thank you. Thank you for staying with us on this beautiful day. And now we'll have this grand finale, namely we'll have a conversation about the democracy and what can and should democratic forces do to strengthen democracy. Now, many of you have mentioned these beautiful views, and I hope it's not only a beautiful overlook over Warsaw about Warsaw's traditions and future, but it will remain also an inspiration for the future. But since we are in this very special place, let me just remind you that this is a place that connects the traditions of the district of Wola. It's about voting, it's about the industrial age, it's about social democracy understood as granting people rights and making it possible for them to make decisions about their own future. But we are also very close to the Daszyński Center, and he could serve as an inspiration. And the reason for that is that the state as such should be perceived as a social contract. And now I would like to invite the first speaker. And before I welcome him, I would like to ask my colleagues, the speakers, Krzysztof Śmiszek, chair of the Polish delegation in the European Parliament, former Deputy Minister of Justice, Karolina Zioło, Deputy Minister of Science and Higher Education, and Paulina Piechna-Więckiewicz, Ministry of Education. But she worked in the local government of Warsaw for a long time. And today she ran the marathon, a different one than our conference. Now I would like to give the floor to the Deputy Prime Minister, but before I give over to him. Now, we've heard that it should be about courage. When we talk about democracy, we rely on our concepts from the past, but the paradigm has shifted. So the forces that used to be skeptical towards democracy, now they say that progress brings many threats, and they want us to be nostalgic about the past. So, given that you are Deputy Prime Minister, but also Minister for Digitization, in the time of this digital capitalism, how can we deal with that so that this progress that we've been discussing today serves the people, serves democracy, so that it's not taken over by digital oligarchs, but to the contrary, so that it makes it possible for us to have this new kind of social communication? What can we do to abandon the space of individualism so that we can do things together? And now, Krzysztof Gawkowski, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Digitalization. Welcome on stage again. Dear friends, I'm very happy to meet with you again on this stage. And we've heard so many important words. It's a real inspiration. And this will not only be this part about Europe. It will be about society, because democracy is about society, and society is democracy. So, Anna, the question that you asked, the answer is very simple. Democracy is technological sovereignty. So, in the era of this technology that has caused a revolution, but given this technologization of our everyday life, as it's become part and parcel of our everyday lives, of our every minute of our lives, both at work and at home, we should think about this resilience, where it is most important. Because if you ask me to talk about democracy today in terms of social responsibility, I would be using this word, resilience. And this is what we need to teach the Polish society, European and global society. Because new technologies will be impacting human life in many ways. Firstly, it will give you the impression that the information is everywhere, but it will not teach you the ability to detect information, to to recognize it. It will give us the impression that we know things, that there is social communication, because big social media, it seems that they bring people closer. It seems to us that we know what is going on, despite not having real-life conversations. And finally, democracy had been built on independent choices that are made by human beings because they enter certain interaction with a group of people. Today, democratic choices are not an interaction between people. It's not because we see these people in real life, be it 50 or 100 people. It's because we follow thousands of people that we follow, or who inspire us, or who frighten us, but in the digital world. So I think that the biggest threat to democracy is lack of accountability for the development of the digital world. Because it did not happen today or yesterday. It was in 2016 during American elections. It seemed that the American democracy, the cradle of this democracy, it seemed it was impossible, but there was this Cambridge Analytica scandal, and it turned out that democracy can have a remote control, even if it has solid ground. Then the British referendum, which left the UK outside of the EU, and then all kinds of elections, right to the elections in Romania that were annulled right before the second round because there was external interference and because there was a lot of external illegal financing. And it was done by force, basically, because the whole electoral process had been cancelled. And this is the world in which we've been living. And also Polish citizens and European citizens, they need to be aware of the fact that democracy will create a different kind of accountability, responsibility for our future. Because democracy will be facing not only false information, but it will have to deal with the answer to the question of how to explain it to someone that everything that's been happening can have an impact on the decisions that they make. Now, the society has not faced such a challenge before. It has never been such a time and place and space where people wouldn't know what is true and what is untrue. Of course, there had been narratives in the past, and usually it was in authoritarian states, and it still does happen. But democracy knew how to defend itself. Today, however, democracy equals freedom of speech. Many people think that this is equal. Democracy means I can say whatever I want. I think this is the right place to say that this is not democracy. Well, freedom of speech is freedom of speech on the internet, but according to the rules that we establish in the real world. If in the real world we have this contract that you get punished if you tell lies, it should be the same in the online world. If we agree that you cannot hit anyone, be it by hand, using a tool, or kick anyone, then we have to say that we do not agree with hateful content online. If we agree that we have this press law that says you cannot lie in the press or in the media, then on the internet you have to agree that you cannot write just anything and say it's a freedom of speech. And this is the challenge for Europe and for Poland, because these are difficult questions that you need to find answers to. Equality on the internet and freedom of speech, they do not entail that you can do anything you want. No. And democracy will defend itself only when it knows how to answer to the challenges of the future. And we are now on the eve of this challenge. It's only coming because we think we know what is behind all these algorithms and what you can find on big media platforms, and we think we know that it can impact our thinking. It's bad, of course. We have to fight that, but it's just the beginning. It's not even the end of the beginning. It's not even about us being able to tell what will happen in the future, because in the future there will be AI suggesting us things, and we have to realize that, because by expecting certain things from the devices in the online world, we will be exposed to this risk of not us human beings supervising the content. And this is the real risk in the digital world, because we need to develop these solutions in our important documents, including in the Constitution, just not to fall prey to this illusion that the internet is the freedom of speech. No, you need to put limits on what is on it. You cannot lie, you cannot introduce illegal content, you cannot finance anything illegally. And this is what you can do right now. In Romania, during the electoral campaign, one candidate on the Russian side, well, a few billion euros was spent just to promote his content. It did not happen in a country that we could say is, you know, outside of a democratic EU member state, far away from Poland. No, it was but 1,000 kilometers from Warsaw. It was in the capital of Romania. Now, this is the way we should think about the state, and it can save us. Freedom is indispensable to democracy, but if we go to the extreme, this might be the killing factor for the democracy. And this is the challenge for Poland and for Europe in the 21st century. We need to create new framework, democratic framework, in which when you rebuild or reinforce democracy, you do not have to be afraid of calling a lie, calling dishonesty, and lack of justice. And both politicians, civic society organizations, and basically everyone need to feel responsible for that, because there are no winners or losers. It's about us respecting our choices and our choosing being made on the basis of real content. And this is, I believe, the beginning of this conversation about democracy, about the path forward, and about whether we can imagine that we resign from something in order to get something else. And these discussions, I've said at the very beginning, it should be a bold, courageous discussion in Europe, because we overlooked many years. And this is one of the reasons for which some of the real problems, such as the elections in the US, this is why it happened. And it's also part of us becoming responsible of how false narratives can have an impact on the real world, on these events that then impact our real world. So I hope that we are mature enough right now to talk about technological sovereignty, informational sovereignty. I hope we are mature enough right now to translate these discussions into actual legal acts and to shape this reality in a way in which we will not be afraid of our own shadow. Because in Europe, people tend to think that freedom is enough, and everyone just wants to, say that freedom is the most important thing. And if there is anyone saying that you can abuse freedom, then it leads to the collapse of democracy. I hope that Europe will not be a place where democracies collapse and people just have the impression that they live in a free world. Thank you.
Dziękujemy, panie premierze.
Thank you very much. So the message that comes through from your expose is that values remain constant, values need to be defended, but the reality out there is different. And sometimes it's difficult to make those values clear and to make them practicable within the new reality. Krzysztof Śmiszek, I have a question for you. Let me start with this question. In the previous panels, we raised the issue that there's a sense of unrest. People feel they're not entirely safe. To what extent can a security policy remedy this? We also said that well-being and prosperity is something that fuels trust, but the political map in Europe has shifted very much. You had our delegation to the European Parliament, so I understand that on the one hand you're still getting a lot of compliments on the last Polish elections, Poland leaving the road of totalitarianism. But what next? How do we stop people from the people who think that elections are simple, and that there is a return to the past, that you can just shut yourself off from the rest of the world? maybe what people are feeling today, like what we've said about respect for your fellow man, maybe this is something to be cultivated in politics. How do you see this as a European MP in the European bubble? What are the challenges that the EU and Poland should address to rebuild democracy and uphold it? Thank you for that question. Hello, everyone. I'm extremely pleased to be part of this panel, but we also arranged with the panelists that we would be speaking to the point and briefly and stick to the conference agenda. So I think that one good illustration of what European societies feel right now, especially the young generation, is let me give you an anecdote. A week ago, I had an open meeting in a mid-sized Polish town, the town of Nysa. Several dozen people came. We talked about the challenges for Europe, for Poland, about the coming Polish presidential elections. And there was a very young man in the room, around 20 years of age. He said that he was very much behind social democratic values. And I asked him, why do you think people your age have gone so fast from a rather enthusiastic perception of the left just a few years ago? Why have they shifted to the right, indeed to radical right positions? Why do they support the Confederacy in Poland, so the far right? And this boy, this young man, told me one thing that shocked me, astonished me. I would have never thought of this. He said, my friends, my male and female friends today want to vote for the Confederacy, Confederacja, because they are a party of peace. And to me, as a social democrat, as a leftist, as somebody for whom peace has always been one of the major values, now today I hear that people want to vote for the far right because they represent peace as a value, or they represent peace values, values that include peace or no war. So I think this young man gave me a very simple answer to all those questions that we have been poring over here in Poland and in the European Parliament as to why these new rightist movements are gaining such big popularity. In some sense, I don't want to say that we are a victim of necessity. We as the left or the center left, social democracy and so on, we are sort of in the mainstream of public debates. We say that we need to invest in defense. We need to predict sources of unrest, including military threats. However, in this drive to obtain answers, and in this mass narrative of how we need to arm, we need to be prepared for the military challenges, I think what we fail to notice is that on the same breath, we should be talking about social security. So this young man's answer is a pointer, a tip for us, though shocking, where we as the left, I think, are losing when speaking of safety and security. We're losing because we're not talking enough about peace. Another issue, like what Mr. Gawkowski mentioned, the issue of freedom, the value of freedom, which today is under assault, is threatened by all those who sort of just mouth the word, whereas their actions show otherwise. So I beg to differ with my friend, Mr. Gawkowski, who mentioned during his brief expose that in Romania, force was used or violence was employed to stop the populists after the first round of the elections. On the contrary, I believe, what happened in Romania was a certain resilience against violence. So there were strong independent institutions that had a mandate to intervene, which did intervene precisely at the moment when democracy was under assault. Of course, it's a totally unprecedented event in Europe. Election results are annulled after the first round. But as a Democrat, I believe that democracy is resilient. So this word resilience is the buzzword nowadays. Democracy will only be as resilient as its institutions. So I believe that yes, of course, we saw an unprecedented, shocking situation, the annulment of presidential election results. But the institutions are there for a reason. We have with us in the room a member of the National Electoral Commission, Ryszard Kalisz. And I think that in Poland today, we can also say that we have institutions. Not all the institutions are democratic, but we do have democratic institutions that stand guard, and they respond whenever basic democratic values are attacked. So I think that we need to keep talking about this despite the rapid changes occurring. We need to keep saying that Europe and European democracy or European democracies will only be as strong as their institutions. Probably in the second round of questions, I would also like to focus on civil society because for me that is the other pillar of democratic resilience. Thank you, Krzysztof. You raised a lot of important points, especially on the issue of freedom. Yesterday, Karolina Jołoburczuk, we talked with Karolina, we talked about the sort of terms that we use today when thinking about politics and about the expectations this creates for politics and politicians. Today, we know that one important criterion is what in Poland they call delivering, whether a politician delivers or not. That makes him popular or not. And on the other hand, the party represented by politicians, to what extent the party delivers on its election promises, because reality is very complex today. It's so easy to say, oh, well, okay, but it takes a long time to deliver, or that was a rotten compromise, because compromises always mean dropping and relinquishing things. And I know that you represent different profiles. You are in the Ministry of Science and Higher Education, so you are in a position that decides about our horizons and how we educate the employees and staff of the future. There's also the issue of progress, how to talk about it so that people don't get scared, but come to believe the new reality will be better. You're also an MP, or a councillor, so you talk to regular citizens on a daily basis, and you're also a professor, a lecturer. So in this reality, which is full of critical and dire choices, how do we talk about politics so that citizens feel represented? I don't know if I can say anything new because this category of effectiveness or delivering, that this focus on efficiency has been around for a very long time. Maybe it's always been there. But I'm prompted to say, I'm tempted to say that the language of values should be the constant in politics, because we're not always able to deliver. We're not always able to achieve something. Reality is complicated, or we only do it halfway. However, if we stick to our permanent values, which don't change, it's very important to remain faithful to them. And the same holds for our discussions on security before and today. We need to define what security is for us, for the left. And we need to define how it should be organized and delivered and who should be responsible. There are many simple answers here, of course. So if we have the right who says that it's the citizen who's responsible, so we need to give people access to guns, or a church home shooting range as a slogan, that the way to defend ourselves, that we should be like Switzerland, with a gun in every house, every household. But we know that a gun in every household is no response, is no guarantee of safety. Will be less safe, in fact. Another issue is the way we treat immigrants and migrants who arrive here, both those coming legally and those coming illegally. And we need a model that provides our security and provides humanity. It would be very bad for those two things to be in conflict. So a conflict between national security and humanitarian values at the basis of our world. That is a false opposition conjured up by far-right organizations which say that in order to be safe, we need to be ruthless, we need to be cruel, no questions asked. That's the discussion we are about to have when the discussion about landmines. We've already had it in the 80s all over the world and in the 90s, and it's come full circle now. It's back. Except this time it's going to be up to us to decide. So, looking at the constant elements, the underpinnings of the left, that's important to keep in mind. And not giving in or not getting sucked into these false dichotomies, these false narratives. For instance, that our safety needs sacrifices, requires cruelty, keeping someone out, being ruthless to someone. Because we could organize it differently. But what do we need? We need a strong state that enjoys trust. And by a strong state, I don't mean a totalitarian one, but a strong, efficient, effective state, which is always going to take the citizens' side. I'm not going to go into the fact that taxes are needed and so on. I don't want to scare anyone with taxes, and I don't want to be addressing the program of the far right. We know what it means to be a responsible left, and I think that we are one. Thank you, Carolina. So on the one hand, we have the paradigm of freedom and how not to appropriate this, how not to give it up. And then we have the state that can be trusted. And like one other thing that Krzysztof mentioned, civil society, participation, politics being open to participation. And Karolina Piechna-Więckiewicz, we want school to be a place that educates citizens who are able to tell truth from falsehood. It is also a place that brings people together, creates community, gives hope for the future. You are also very active on various initiatives that try to provide equal opportunities and increase young people's participation in political life, removing prejudice against those who have limited access to the same opportunities. So today, when democracy is not just institutional and political, how are we to educate citizens so they ask and demand democracy all across the board in all the contexts of their daily life? Thank you. Hello again. So one of the answers, because there's never one answer, an answer to populism and extreme swings comes with education. And the left has been saying this from the very beginning, ever since, as a movement, it formulated a program and its demands as an instrument to give people equal opportunities and to allow everybody to be active participants. I'll start on a sad note. Maybe I shouldn't, but I will. Let me say this. It's hard to be at the Ministry of National Education, where at the Ministry of Defense is sort of rules the roost, and that's where we are, and I think we will be for a long time. However, we need to do everything so that young people get instruments so they can understand precisely what misinformation is, and so they're able to fight it. So aside from programs, the curriculum, and we have a new subject that's starting on September 1st. It's called civic education, which is supposed to give young people knowledge about political institutions, the state, disinformation, and so on. It's all very important. And also the way this subject is going to be run or taught. So young people will go visit institutions. They will work in groups, in teams. So they get in touch with each other. So they talk and build policies together, propose policies, so they get agency. Because today, young people often clamor for agency. And everywhere I go, not here, well, just to make that clear, it's not from you that I'm hearing this, but wherever I go, I hear of this generation that doesn't want to get involved. They don't want to take part in these groundbreaking political events, which is totally untrue, because if I was to compare my generation from the 90s and the beginning of the 21st century, the scale of young people's involvement all across the board in politics, in volunteering. Of course, there are more instruments that are being offered to them, of course, but young people are everywhere. They want to get involved. Yes, sometimes they stand in the street, they block traffic, fighting against climate change and voicing their civil dissent, but you can't be a hypocrite either. You want young people to get involved, and then you might say, okay, we might not always like the way you protest, and you also need to be aware of the sort of responsibility of your responsibilities and consequences, but you're there and getting involved. So, because why? I really like this comparison. Why do minors have a right to strike? It's a labor right, constitutionally protected, but young people don't have the right to protest about their future, which we are making for them without their participation. If we want active, aware citizens, then we need to let them take part in decision making to the extent that they're able at the stage of life they're in, clearly. But if we want them to go to war for the country in the near future, because a lot of people are talking about this in Polish homes today, how are we going to convince them? What will they be dying for? A country that fails to consider them and their wants and needs? And I apologize for saying this. I'm saying this in response to Krzysztof, because Confederacy tells them, if you want to go to war, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. Whereas we go to TV shows and we talk about how one needs to get training, how one needs to fight for Europe, for one's country, for the values they represent. So these young people need to know exactly what they're fighting for. They have a right to this knowledge. They have, therefore, the right to be part of it and to decide if we want responsibility from them, because we're demanding responsibility. We're putting a lot of demands on them. This generation has really had it hard. They went through COVID, remote schooling. They're now going through a political debate that is emotionally crazy. They're growing up in this world. They're growing up in a world in which they're lonely, in which human relationships have loosened. There are no relationships quite often. In order to build a responsible social policy, to build societal resilience, there have to be relationships, and the state needs to invest in human relationships, and it needs to invest in public policies.
Bo nie chcę.
Now, at the end, let me just show you. I'm quite old school in terms of using new IT technologies. This institute from Kiel said that the engagement leads to limitation of populist activism. So this is a study from April last year. So which says that in the regions where there was more financial support for public policies, there was a drop to the tune of 15 or 20% drop in the support of right-wing parties. So this is what we need to convince the youth into. We are the answer and not the Confederacy, as they have no answers. And of course, I mean this Polish party, Confederacy. But if you know, this is why we need political education, because if the young people really read this program, the social, economic consequences, if they had the knowledge, they would know that it is us. We can guarantee their rights as individuals, and this is important for them. And one last thing, very important in terms of digitization, and when we're talking about the world we've been living in, there is this huge problem, because we've been moving forward, but there is a problem with vaccinations in schools against HPV. And the Łazarski University conducted studies. Where do people get information from? And I thought that they would get this information from the internet, but it turns out that no. Still, the source of information and the authority for many people are their family, their relatives. So if you do not have these social relations, and if there is no way in which you can fight this information, because people do not talk with each other anymore, they are not in touch, they do not confront each other. And in this situation, they cannot come to any conclusions. They cannot dispel any of the false theories. Well, they are very vulnerable. We are all very vulnerable. Thank you so much, Paulina. And thank you for raising this topic, which was well received by the public. It was about the engagement. We still have a few minutes left, so I would like to quickly get back to the panelists. As we've promised, we will have this time discipline. And yes, there will be questions from the room as well, but still, about the engagement. Krzysztof Śmiszek, your political career was from the local government. Paulina said that if the youth engage, if they feel co-responsible, then their political choices are different than when they feel isolated. From a different reality. But it's, you know, you do not engage in the same way in politics today. This is the first part of my question. And secondly, many NGOs have been saying that it is more difficult to be active in NGOs, especially in these countries where you can see the authoritarian state encroaching. So what can we do with this thing? Well, we have the tools. I don't want to reiterate your diagnosis, but we know that for radicalizing governments, it is a real problem if you have this free, strong civic society. At the beginning, you asked me about the perception of Poland over 1 year after the elections, how it is perceived in the European Parliament. So it has a good media coverage in the sense that it is depicted as one of the first countries that was able to abolish this, to reverse rather this populist reverse the trend and to get back on the democratic track. The situation right now is very dangerous. For example, in Hungary, after so many years, the government of Orban is still able to, tighten the grip when it seemed, that you could not even go further against the civic society, but they have been doing that. 3 days ago, they adopted a special bill that bans equality marches. A few months ago, there was the bill adopted about the so-called sovereignty defense. And this bill was questioned by the European Commission. There will be a procedure against Hungary before the European Court of the Court of Justice of the European Union, and there will be the engagement of the civic society. The Polish Minister of Justice will agreed to join this case. A few weeks back, the Polish government joined the case, and it will be on the side of the civic society in this hearing. But if you want a brief answer from me, what should Europe do? Well, I will tell you that Europe should increase this fund from the European budget. We will be having discussions about the financial perspective. There should be an important increase to the fund that was created a few years ago to strengthen the civic society and free media. We can see what's been happening in the US. There are many valuable social initiatives. They've lost funds from USAID. And today, Europe is a well-off continent with a lot of money. So Europe should take on responsibility, and it should really start acting. It should replace USAID where possible and finance independent civic society. Now, we've been talking in the European Parliament a lot about one more thing. I've always been saying that it's not only about political sources. It's not the political sources that have led to this change of the ruling party. It's this formal and non-formal relations and civic society. They have raised the awareness and consequently led to the situation in which this government, democratic government, is in power right now. It's an absolute exception in the case of Poland. Unfortunately, it's very sad, but in Hungary and on behalf of the S&D, I'm responsible for monitoring Article 7 procedure against Hungary. I'm a member of this group, and sadly, Orban is doing well. And the reason for that is that Hungary lacks this self-organized civic society like the one that we have in Poland. So when you mention resilience, when you mention democracy that will be protected by political parties, but also by by these countries that believe it constitutes some value, well, what we have to do is to strengthen civic society, not only not to cause them administrative problems, but to facilitate their activity, helping them build relations, what Paulina Piechna has mentioned. This will definitely contribute into increasing our resilience. Thank you so much. So we've touched upon many topics. We've mentioned the rules that should be enforced in democratic policy, the rules that should be obeyed, that stem from such values as freedom, equality, respect for another human being. And before, we had briefly discussed how we can equip people with this critical sense of critical thinking, so they know how to interpret reality. But also, it's about rebuilding social relations. But the democratic policy is an art of compromises today, because I can see Karolina Zioło, she knows where I'm heading. But you've provoked me because you mentioned confederacy in your speech. And hence my question, because we've been complaining about polarization in politics, about politics becoming cynical and brutal. So how can you be a responsible politician, but at the same time have the courage, the ability to create this reality that will be better without this risk of it being too idealistic or too naive. We discussed it yesterday, so the conclusions were very interesting, and I would like you now to talk about that in public. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm quite naive, to be honest. I am not very much convinced. Well, this means some kind of an openness, and I'm not convinced that it's that bad. And now the path that we have taken of talking about politics, like talking about it as if it were a brutal, cynical game, well, I'm not sure that this is the correct way of talking about that. I know it was quite fashionable with the 1990s, and it seems tempting also today. But still, it's the minority, in comparison to what's happening in general. What Paulina Piechna-Więckiewicz has mentioned, the young people organizing or the civic society, all these forces, well, they people act because they want to change. They have clear intention, clean and good intentions, and it can be found in everyday politics. And I'm deeply convinced that those who talk about their ideals, even if these ideals are contrary to mine, they are honest about that. I always have this kind of an attitude. You cannot pretend for too long. Just try to pretend that you've been doing that for yourself. Now, what the Prime Minister said, Prime Minister Gawkowski, our life and life on social media. Well, this lack of sincerity can be noticed very easily. And what can protect us against inconsistency or against it being discovered is remaining close and faithful to your ideas, to your opinions. And I think it's a huge responsibility, and Paulina has mentioned that. This is on the side of the education, and including higher education. We should ask young people and to organize them to have the space so that they can organize themselves and fight for their cause. I am very much for the voice of students to be better heard, PhD students and students. I think they should have more influence on what's been happening in the academia, because this is the first step of how we can really shape our own reality. It's about shaping this world, because this is the world where they are supposed to be able to live. So I think social studies or humanist studies should get enough attention as well, because they are the ones that can protect us against these lies on the internet. They can protect us against propaganda. I know that if you are an engineer, you can just develop a nice algorithm. Yes, that's what I thought, that some IT specialist will turn my mic off when I start talking about social studies. But anyway, it's, investing in your humanity is a huge responsibility of ours. This is what can save us. This is what can save us against what Prime Minister Gawkowski mentioned, against these traps of the contemporary world. As we are very much like our ancestors, even if our reality on this 42nd floor seems to be completely different. All right, the last question, and then we'll just open the floor for discussion. Just brace yourselves. You can be critical in what you have to say. And I'm mentioning this critical voice and protest because Karolina said that this can inspire you to change your mentality. And Krzysztof said that civic society was one step ahead of the political elites as a way of protest. And Karolina has mentioned that we need to organize a space in a way in which people can meet and articulate and talk about their aspirations for the future. But you've also mentioned some risks, Karolina, because people organize themselves, they have an idea as to how this reality could look like, and then it turns out that even if they were heard, well, And these ideas are not turned into actions. This is what's called democracy deficit, and as a result, people feel harmed. And very often, the victims are traditional political parties because they are perceived as these elites. They are perceived as making use of this climate of social protest. They are not able to talk to these groups. They want a political opening. How can we prevent a situation in which young people whom we want to be critical, if they come up with the idea of like a Green Deal or different conditions at the workplace, how to not make them disappointed, how to make it happen that they do not feel that traditional parties or organizations will always go down the beaten track. The first thing I just want to say why I use this word war, because we want to prevent wars. So this was kind of a metaphor that I used, given what people expect, some people expect from the young people without listening to them. We have to do what we can to prevent the war. Just wanted to reiterate that. It's about being efficient, but not only on the side of politicians, but all the citizens. It's about developing instruments, be it a referendum, so that more people have real engagement in power, so that territorial governments have more competences. It's about all kinds of resolutions or civic initiatives. These are legal instruments that can be used in the legislative process at the level of the local government and central administration. It's been happening in Poland, yes. And so far I've been, I had this peace of mind that it would continue like that. We'll be having more and more of these instruments and resources, and all the citizens, once they learn at school how to use them, they will be able to use them. And it's a huge problem for me today, how to talk with the young generation. But not only the young generation, just to make it clear, but how to talk to the people, because political parties have failed them. Someone yesterday mentioned the crisis of leadership. Marcin Duma is at the back of the room. Yes, he reminded me that. So young people, they want to be efficient. They want to participate in the decision-making process. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that they do not expect from the selected leaders to take responsibility and to show the direction. All right? So we should not be under this illusion that young people want to decide upon everything. There are adult politicians selected by their political parties. They've been elected. Well, and it's a problem because they do not have the kind of the authority that they used to have. In all the speeches, even when they try to paint these political visions, they are either repetitive or their language is not well understood. It's not only for young people, because, we talk about young people, but many elderly, they complain about, it's not about not knowing the language in the sense of words. It's just empty words and doesn't mean anything because it's not translated into concrete action. So as long as these politicians do not actually act, as long as they don't say, yes, we've adopted that, we've earmarked money for that, yes, this is thanks to what your postulates, well, then it doesn't matter if you are an elderly or a young person. These words will not mean anything. And it's terrifying because words can kill today, but at the same time, when politicians use words, well, in this positive sense, they do not mean a thing. And it's very important what we've heard about humanist studies and about logics as well. because I'm not saying that in public, because young people expect us to organize it in a way in which they will have fewer subjects during their studies. But I think we could all make use of some logical studies, starting in primary school, just so that we are able to identify phenomena and differentiate between various phenomena. So there is no answer, and I feel quite helpless. Just like Carolina, I want to remain naive, and I'm proud in European values. And President Trump, that's my impression, he's not, well, my cup of tea, to put it mildly, but there will be his successors, and there's nothing to be proud of, you know, in this sense. So my daughters are 15 and 13 years of age. And I had this privilege, because I believe it was a privilege, when, just like a few of my colleagues, when I had the privilege to hear about that in the chancellery of the Prime Minister, when the results of the referendum were announced on Poland joining the European Union. It was, you know, it was an amazing moment. And I would never suspect that a few years later that my children will be brought up in a world where the rights of women are taken away on a systematic basis, where human rights, well, Carolina has mentioned the convention from Ottawa, but the very basics have been undermined. You know, these basics that have been evolving for many decades. So I would never imagine we would live in this world, and that my children would live in this world.
I'm being told, because I also deal with young people's mental health. Psychiatrists today are telling me that children, aside from all the crises because of COVID, social media, peer hate, and so on, children are feeling a real lack of safety. They lack a sense of safety because right next to them, in their classrooms, are their friends whose parents have been killed, Ukrainian children who had to flee their country. And these kids come to a psychiatrist and they say, I'm afraid of war. Children. And so pretending that this is not a thing, that it's not a threat, and that is a challenge to me as Minister of Education. How do we tell them about the world while saying, you're safe, things will be good, things will be okay? And that is up to us, because we can't frighten people. People need to be supported in all respects so they feel safe, and that is a great responsibility, and politicians need to grow up. Thank you. Let's take 2 or 3 questions from the room. Or critical remarks. They don't have to be questions. You can protest if you disagree.
In your ears, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. No, in all seriousness, a good, pleasant afternoon to you all. First off, I'd like to thank the panel for their words, especially about students and the youth. I'd like to thank Paulina especially. I'm someone who is currently receiving psychiatric care, and I know many of my colleagues who are as well. I am a university student, and I know many people who, at least in the Czech Republic, are not receiving it because of simply the lack of psychiatrists, the lack of availability of care in general. I'd also like to congratulate us, if that's the right word, for the fact that for the first time today we have a mostly female panel. Either way, I wanted to do a slow clap, but yeah. I had one question. So at the start, especially Krzysztof talked about the fact that, you know, the word peace, the meaning of it has been co-opted. Social democracy used to be a quite anti-militaristic movement and ideology. Fervently, actually, I'd say. And of course, we've had to change that stance. I think it's a good decision. However, I'd like to play the devil's advocate a bit, and I'd like to ask if this about-face hasn't pretty much given the word peace to the far right. If we didn't cause the fact that others who are not acting in the opinions and in the beliefs of the people, if we didn't give them this gift pretty much for free, with our fervent push towards, no, we must protect our society and we must impose the will of the state on its citizens, because the state are citizens, citizens are the state. And one last thing, but that's not a question. Christoph, you said you were monitoring Hungary. I'd like to say that I hope you're prepared to monitor the Czech Republic also after the next elections we elect our own Orbán once more.
Thanks very much. Can you pass the mic just behind you?
Dzień dobry wszystkim, nazywam się Krzysztof Cyryński.
I am a student at the Warsaw School of Economics, and regarding security, regarding safety, like what Paulina mentioned, one case in which there is no security, this occurred to me. Sometimes we need to tell people, okay, things will be okay, but there is no guaranteed security. Tell them, rather than saying, yes, we're safe, but rather things may be safe if we work together. We need to work together to be safe. A question to Krzysztof. Things like US aid currently, because the cooperation they had, the financing for different organizations, now they have shifted that, they have transferred that to right-wing organizations. And what should we do? What steps should we take? And also regarding the Ottawa Convention, I beg to differ. The US never ratified that convention. However, a much more destructive thing to civilized standards would be the cassette weapons convention. And that is a weapon of mass destruction that destroys rights as well. Cluster munitions. Minister Kalisz, so it occurred to me that since two young people are taking the floor, that's a very good thing. But an older person should be allowed to speak as well. What I found lacking in this panel, the ladies are very young, and so is Krzysztof. What I was lacking was a reference to the subject of this panel, the title, Rebuilding Democracy, Reviving Democracy. If we want to revive something, that implies the thing doesn't exist or only exists fragmentarily, and that is true. What we're seeing today in Europe and around the world, especially in the US, though not only, and in Poland all the time, all of this indicates that we are in a stage where populism is in its prime. It's not the right, it's not conservatism, it's not republicanism. Even what Trump represents and his buddies in the States. The same for Hungary and Slovakia, just not far behind. Please note that the Smer party in Slovakia, headed by Fico, not so long ago, they were a leftist party. And the SLD, the SDLP, Smer wasn't around then, but the Polish SLD had close contacts with them, with their predecessor. And what happened to Smer? They have become a populist right-wing party. And finally, Poland. Do we really have a democracy here today, as defined by freedom, rule of law, free speech, free debates, free discussions? It's all very superficial. It's just the formal picture. I'm very happy to have so many young people here, to see them here. because a large part of students and young people today have turned right. When we learn that within the 18 to 24 group, over 50% want to vote for Manson, that is alarming. So how do we revive the democracy in their minds? It just so happens I'm a little older, but I do have 3 sons, 10, 12, and 15 years of age. So if you were to talk to them, they have very democratic leftist views. I would even say they're even more leftist than myself. They even admonish me. They tell me, "No, be careful, remember this." So it is all up to us. It's a question of upbringing, of education in school. We as the left, we were successful on one thing. Our state has become much more secular. Poland has become more secular. Let me give you an example. Again, in reference to my sons, my 10-year-old son, this is the age when people go to their first communion, and of course he goes to a public school. All my boys go to public schools. So out of 19 students in his class, only 6 are going to have their first communion. So this is something that has worked, especially in big cities. Secularity, a secular state. This aim has been achieved. I'm almost done. So briefly, the left should always be progressive. We can't look at what is there today. What I expect from myself, but also from your generation, because today you're in positions of power, of decision-making, from Krzysztof, from how do we change the internet, those portals, to prevent this hate speech, this arrogance, this dominance, not through administrative methods alone, but so that groups come together, progressive groups that demand the truth. Look at Wikipedia, for instance. There are so many lies and omissions there. And why? Because Wikipedia has been monopolized by right-wingers, by Confederacy-like voters. So I'm asking a simple question. We could have done something, but there's no self-organization. There's no... Because just saying that we're strong is too little. We need to be strong sociologically. We need to be strong online in various discussions, in all kinds of media, including on social media. So that's my contribution. Although, one thing to Krzysztof, the last thing I'll say. A week ago tomorrow, a leader of a conservative right-wing party said we're the combative democracy. But he doesn't know anything. He's full of it because he's citing Tusk. The notion of combative democracy, that's 1937, Karl Liebenstein, who, seeing the fascists seize more and more power, coined that term. He didn't know War was about to happen, and he didn't know what the state would be like after fascism was defeated. And Löwenstein was a leftist. We often forget lawyers who coined such notions. And Tusk, we should also be living his ideas. The whole notion of militant democracy says that there's room for everyone in a democracy, but those who destroyed, who were destroying democracy need to be restrained. And what have we got in Poland today? And the left isn't saying anything about it. Structures seminal to a democracy are parties, and our parties are extremely authoritarian, non-democratic, dictatorial. I'm not going to expand on this, and there's no reflection in Parliament on the internal party structures. There's one act on political parties that allows this to proliferate, and PiS can still function. I'm not saying exclude them from politics, but they should be democratic on the inside too. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for these words. I think our panelists will take it up. But before we finish, in a panel on democracy, we only look at some parts of the picture because we only have an hour. And nonetheless, there were 3 important remarks made during this round, and I would like you to respond to 1 or 2 points that inspired you. Very, very briefly, just 1 minute. Krzysztof knows what it's like in the European Parliament. Let's start with Paulina. So we didn't start with democracy. We didn't start our panel on democracy because we are agreed to on the point that democracy is in crisis. Yes, education is important. Upbringing is important. We need political education. And yes, we need to tell people there are threats to their safety and that we need to build resilience to all sorts of crises. However, we need to pick the right narrative. So if things peak, we don't want to scare people. We talk about civil defense in education, mental crises, natural disasters. We talk about this in education. Young people need to be aware of this should such disasters occur. And I think our response to the crisis of democracy is, first of all, having a strong leadership, responsible leadership, and rebuilding social connections, social relations. Loneliness is one of the leading causes, one of the greatest diseases of civilization of the 21st century. Lonely people are desperate, they're vulnerable. It's very easy to sway them, to manipulate them. I remember Father Rydzyk speaking on his radio to thousands of seniors in small towns, and it was the only person telling them that he's interested in their fate. He's there for them. So let's not let Confederacy and the populists to be the only people speaking to those who today need our support and a sense of safety. Karolina. Yes, so a short philosophical reflection that I always wonder. We often hear that if you want peace, prepare for war. We hear that maxim. So I think actually it's truer to say, if you don't want war, then prepare for peace. So grow your security, grow your country, the education, well-being, prosperity, the support for the weakest, social advancement, equal opportunities. Strong states don't breed extremes. People can get help in difficult life situations. So where we are today is precisely that. We need to see how our situation is really unique, and we have a great opportunity to reform ourselves, to shift towards an enduring and prosperous peace and security, and we should be focusing on that. And Krzysztof? Yes, briefly, yes, I agree with my colleagues, and I think that one of the most important challenges for the left and for social democracy is, again, going back to picking up a narrative of peace. As pro-state politicians, we are a community. We are that is responsible, and we have a healthy perception of reality, including the international environment. But we cannot let the peace language be taken away from us. And the right, the populist right, is now tapping into the language of peace. We need to reclaim it. And I think that the first and second panel with my colleagues from the European Parliament about housing and so on, I think that is one thing where we are credible and where we deliver, to use that term. So I think that we can talk of housing and peace on just in everyday life. Thank you so very much. So we started with values, we talked about the quality of our democracy, and we talked about how to get citizens involved, but also how to build protection, how to protect against disinformation and propaganda. We talked about the role of NGOs, social dissent